Hello and welcome to Jessie James Beads right here on Facebook today. You might be watching the replay on YouTube or the blog, who knows. It first went live on the 26th of March, it's Saturday. Here in the UK the sun is shining brilliantly. We're having an unseasonably warm start to spring, which is wonderful. I could use some of that warmth in my bones. So happy to be here with you on Facebook for Jessie James Beads. If we haven't met before, my name is Jem, I live in the UK and I work primarily with wire and beads and gemstones and cabs and all kinds of things like that. Tell me about your day. What have you been up to? How is the weather where you are at in the world? I hope that all things are as well as they possibly can be. I just want to pop you down to the board for a moment to give you a little sneaky peek of what we're looking at today. Let's get down to have a look at those gorgeous Tensha beads. The strand that I've chosen to work with today is called Merlot, which you can probably guess by the incredibly rich colour that's been used in these beads. Now, if you've never ever seen a Tensha bead before, it is an acrylic based bead so that they're super lightweight, and on the bead is a beautiful transfer. Now the transfer is specifically made to sit on a round bead, and then it is covered with another layer of acrylic so that makes that lovely and safe and secure and long lasting. The Tensha beads that I've been sent to work with, I had 3 strands sent over to me and I'm going to show you all of them. What I'm going to do right now is see if there's any possibility of seeing your comments today. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. But what I want to do is talk a little bit about all of the strands that came through to me. There are more shorty strands of Tensha beads available, but this one is Merlot. And I've made our lovely little fan drop pendant with half of the strand, give or take a bead or two. And I'm going to recreate the exact same bead. Might be a rebel and rock it up a little bit and switch the red base one with the white based one. Swap those over. I will be demonstrating for you today with raw copper wire because it just shows up on the camera ever so much better than the silver does. I do want to show you a couple of the other strands that came over to me as well, just so that you can see some of the absolutely outstanding Tensha beads that we have available at Jessie James. Let's just have a look. Monica is in, visiting Dad in Chile, Wisconsin. Rita is in, good morning to you. Robinson Timberlake Shalia is in. You did tell me how to pronounce your name once and I've forgotten. I'm so sorry. Good morning from the US of A. Brenda is in. Good morning to you. Let's see if we can see any more of those comments. You never know. Sometimes I can, sometimes I can't. Not today, my friends. Not today. Never mind. That's all good. We're going to have a look at some of those other beads first. I cut one of the other bead strands. I'm going to put Merlot out of the way for a hot second. We're currently going to look at Moonlit Lilies. It might appear on your screen as just Moonlit, but they are beautiful. I love this design of bead. They're super lightweight, so make perfect jewellery because they don't drag you downwards. Gravity is not an issue. Such beautiful detail. And of course, there's that metallic pizzazz as well, which I adore. It reminds me of traditional cloisonné. So with the bead strand, which is called Moonlit Lilies, you get this beautiful opal-like glass dropper. You get a couple of those, a couple of the rondelles. You get the main feature. You get 2 exquisite partner beads. You also get a ridiculously detailed bead caps. Always amazing. You've got funky spacers. You've got round like a stardust. You've got a rondelle spacer with rhinestones in. And you've also got the star style daisy spacers on that one. That one's Moonlit Lilies. The other strand that I was sent, which I haven't quite braved up to cut yet because it is so exquisite, is Midnight Cherry Blossom. I am absolutely 100% obsessed with Japanese sakura, which is the cherry blossom that's coming out right about now, I imagine. This is a gorgeous set of Tensha beads, not least of the, as we've mentioned before, the metallic highlights and the exquisite detail that you get on a Tensha bead. But I love that this one is partly black and then partly a milky, luminescent, almost moonlight-like effect on the other side. So this is Midnight Cherry Blossom. I've linked all 3 of these strands in the description so you can go and check those out. But they are all equally beautiful. This is the piece that we're going to work up together today. Let's see if I can see any more of those lovely comments from you. It's beautiful to be with you. Thank you. Leah is in. I really love this strand. They're gorgeous. Becky is in. Love those beads. Me too. Leah says they're all gorgeous. Gabriella says they're gorgeous. Trudy is in. Hello, my darling. If I haven't been able to see your comments, I'm very sorry. Sometimes they pop up, sometimes they don't. What I promise I will do at the end of today's live is I will scan back through and I'll check out any questions that might pop up. Or anything that you write in the comments, I will pick up on before I turn my desktop PC off. It's a fan-inspired pendant. It's not the most fan-like shape in the world, I suppose, but what I want to do is to create jewellery which is recreatable for people who have less experience with wire. I really like all things Japanese design-wise, Japanese art, Japanese clothing. Absolutely gorgeous. Love, love, love Tensha beads. Now, in terms of tools for today, I'm going to be using my flush cutters. A basic set of these round nose pliers. These are from Bead, as are my flush cutters. And my very elderly, faithful bent chain nose pliers. Flat chain nose or straight chain nose pliers are perfectly acceptable. Very affordable. They come in a kit with the round nose as well. But these are my go-to for literally everything I want to achieve. So I'm just going to stick my silly little face up here for a moment and show you a little something that I might be wearing up here. Let's just bring that camera down slightly. Oh look, what's that? It's not the heart of the ocean. It's not that. It's the soul of the ocean. Soul of the Ocean is a Make With Me class coming up next Saturday, Saturday 2nd of April. And if you are in US, you still have time. I believe last time I was told there were 3 kits available. So have a gander, and if that grabs your fancy and you fancy making along with me, 2nd of April at noon Eastern Standard, you still have time to get that on its way to you if you are US based. So let's have another look at today's project, the Merlot. Do hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. It's a fan-inspired pendant, a long drop. I love making long drop pendants. They elongate the neck. They're very glamorous. You can pop one of those on if you're feeling a bit lousy, and it certainly elevates my mood. I hope it will elevate your mood too. So in terms of the wire, I'm using only 2 gauges of wire. As I mentioned earlier, I will be working in raw copper because it shows up on camera ever so slightly better than the silver does. So if I just pop that little dish up and out of the way, let's just have a quick look around the genetics of our pendant. I chose exactly half the strand, all bar, I think, 1 spacer, so that I could recreate the exact same design. Now, because Tensha beads are acrylic, it means they're incredibly lightweight. If you were to have these all in a ceramic, a baked bead, or even certain gemstones, they would be quite weighty. This, although it's quite a long piece, it's about 2 3/4 to 3 inches in length. It's quite a long drop. It's very, very lightweight because those Tensha beads are super beautiful to work with. So we're going to recreate this design, but in a hot copper colour. So hopefully you'll be able to see it a little bit better. Now, my first length of wire is 18 gauge. It's around about 13 to 14 inches. Now, that's probably going to be enough for the entire project. The only other tool that I'm going to grab in is my very old wooden mandrel. Now, if you don't have a ring mandrel, when I made this design, I made it in the other room, and I was having one of those days where I couldn't actually move very far, so I used a lip balm. A tube of lip balm to create the shape. If you don't have a specialist tool, don't worry about it. Although I will say that I also have this really very, very beautiful Beadalon ring mandrel in my favourite colour. It's a bit clunky on screen because it's metal. It's brilliant to work with because it means I can smash a hammer into it if I wish to shape jewellery that I'm making on the fly. So as I say, around about 13 or so inches of that 18 gauge. If you're in the UK, that's 1mm gauge wire. And this is round. I'm working with raw copper. The piece I made earlier was made in silver colour, and this is the German style, which is a medium temper of wire. If you're using a soft wire, it will work out for this design. It's really not that important. You can work with a softer wire. So the first thing that I'm going to do is grip hold of one end of that length of wire and give the first section, the first couple of inches or so, a really nice smooth through. What we're going to do is to create the first fan shape down at the bottom. I'm just going to give that a really nice smooth and warm through. Now if you're making with a lip balm or a lipstick, for instance, you don't need to worry about whereabouts you're using. If you're making with a mandrel, you might like to make a small mark to define the size of this arcing shape that we're making, because you'll want to almost perfectly recreate that arc on a smaller scale later. So I actually have a mark on here from where I whacked it with a hammer quite recently, and that's what I'm going to use for my designated size. Now I've moved around about 3 inches from the end of the wire, and I'm just going to create a nice semicircular form with, like I said, it's about 2.5 inches now of wire just sticking up on the one side. Let me get that out of the way for now. And then I've got a long tail coming away in the opposite direction. So what I want to do is just open that out ever so slightly. And then I'm going to pop in using my bent chain nose pliers. Now before I move any further, I'm just going to try and check in and see if we have any further questions. Mary is in from NC. Such beautiful beads, they really are. Sue says it took me a while, but Gem's videos make it easy to follow along. I appreciate the feedback. My darling Zoe is in. Hello, my friend. Anne is in. Hi from sunny California. Hello to you, my lovely. I hope you're having a beautiful day, and thank you for hanging out with me today. I can only see 4 comments at a time today. Sorry about that, guys. I will check them later, I absolutely promise. So what we're looking to do is to create a fan shape, or the essence of a fan shape. So this one is ever so slightly smaller than the other. So these will most definitely not be earrings. They will become individual pendants. Not that I would mind having 1 silver and 1 copper, because I think if you want to go your own way with jewellery, you absolutely can. If you want to wear completely unmatched earrings, then you do you. However, if you're making to sell, it pays to make the sections, if you're making 2 of these, to just make this section at the same time, so you get that same level of arc, or the same shape and size and form. What I'm going to do is just warm a little bit further along just for a second and bend that around out of the way, because it's going to whack into the camera and literally everything if I don't. So what I want to do is take a look at the shape down at the base, and I want to imagine that that's a half circle that I'm working with. So let's just pop those pliers underneath, and imagining that I'm capturing half a circle, approximately. I'm going to put a very sharp bend all the way over. Now at this stage you could tell that's probably a little bit more than half of a circle, but I'm not overly worried about it. The essence will still be the same. So what I need to do is to make sure that I get those 2 angles at 90 degrees to be at the same kind of distance up from, if you imagine it's a bowl, from the bottom of the bowl. So just line those up for a second. Those wires aren't going to be staying there. I think this side is probably ever so slightly higher, but because we warmed that wire, it gives us an opportunity to just open that back out, pop those pliers in underneath, and just re-squeeze and reform that shape. That looks a little bit more accurate. You could use science and mathematics, but science and mathematics and myself, we are not best friends, I'm afraid. I don't do maths, I don't do numbers very well. So once I've made those really quite sharp angles, what I'd like to do is to support the upper side, one of those sides, and just push the wire up so it's going at about 45 degrees from the point at which we're gripping it. And then we need to do the exact same thing on the other side. So I just hold it like so, and then draw that up. If you don't have a camera in the way, then you won't get these little bent bits on the end. If you do get little bent bits, you can soon straighten that up with the pliers, like so. And I think probably I want a slightly higher angle. You can play around with the design, obviously, until your heart is content. Just flip that around to the other side. And what we're looking to do is to get those crossing at the centre point. If you imagine, let me just take a piece of spare wire. if you imagine at the very, very middle, at the bottom of the bowl shape, you're going to have a line, a straight line coming up. That would need to cross through the point at which those wires transect each other. Is that the right word? I don't know. So I can see that that just needs to come down ever so slightly. We're looking to create almost like a basket shape. That kind of thing going on. Now we've got a long section of wire and we've got a short section of wire. Where these two angled wires meet, I'm going to flip the design over so that I have the correct wire on the correct side. Because I'm right-handed, not for any other reason. What I'm going to do is to support the long tail of wire just underneath where those two wires cross over. It's much easier when you don't have to consider the camera. And I'm going to turn that into a straight up line. So that would be a continuation. If you had that straight line from the bottom middle of the bowl, it would continue upwards, and that's where we're looking for the angle to appear here. I'm just going to flip it on its side now. I'm going to grip the shorter length of angled wire. I'm just going to hold that just exactly the same place we did a second ago. And I'm going to push the wire over so it goes across like so. What we're looking for is for this length from the angled corner to the centre to be the same as this length from the opposite angled corner to the centre. So they need to be around about the same size rather, pardon me. So what you can do is use a ruler or a piece of string if you prefer. What I'm going to do now is just hold this upside down for a second. Sometimes holding a form upside down that you've been looking at will give you an opportunity to judge how accurate you've been. So I can see now that this line is not coming away perfectly centrally. That's a little bit better. So turning things upside down is really quite cool in art as well. If you're painting or drawing, turning it on its head, you'll see things that are a different size that you've become accustomed to when you're looking at it the right way up. So you can see I've got the shorter section of wire in my fingers at the moment. What I want to do is just very gently support where the angle is over the middle section. I've got the shorter section of wire in my pliers and I'm just going to push the tail around the back. So it's wrapping around the core that we created at the centre. So if I put this back into its correct orientation for a moment, you can see we've made it a little bowl to begin with. We've turned it into a basket. Imagine that, I don't know, is it Little Red Riding Hood with the basket? That's her little picnic basket just there. And what we want to do is chase this shorter tail of wire around the upright in the centre. That's our core wire onto which we'll add some beads later. Now, there are a couple of different ways that you can do this. I'm going to support the basket shape, but not where any of the wires cross over. So I'm just using the length of my pliers to hold both angled sides. I'm going to pinch that quite firmly in my non-dominant hand while I take the tail of wire around. And keeping a pinch on that is kind of key in not allowing these two distances of wire to change. So I'm going to just pull that around once and release, and then just tidy up the little coils. So I'm going to give that a bit of a squish to get them to sit side by side, like so. And then on the opposite side of the wire as well. And with a little bit of messing, you can get that a little bit neater than I had it a moment ago. So again, I'm just going to support those two sides of wire and draw that tail of wire around a couple of times. Now, there's a two-handed approach to this. If you have some very broad pliers, such as these were, oh gosh, about £1.50, something ridiculous like $2, $2.25 maybe, many years ago, but they're super useful. So if you see any wide pliers, for a job like this where all I want to do is to support the frame whilst I apply some pressure elsewhere. So you can see I've got a really good grip on both sides, and whilst I am applying a bit of pressure just to hold that, because the pliers are so wide, they won't be marking the wire in the design. If it does mark, don't worry, we're going to add some more wire over it anyway, and I'm not going to lose any sleep over it. Not marking your wire is something that comes with a lot of practice, and even now I still do mark it anyway. So all I'm doing with the shorter tail of wire is rotating it around around like a helix on the core wire until I have got a really nice decorative number of coils. I think that's probably enough, to be honest. When I'm happy with the number of coils I have done around that core wire, I'm just going to trim that very, very end bit away. Please look twice and cut once, and in that way you will not be crying. Then I'm going to tidy up the coil. I'm just going to head over to comments for a second, see if there are any questions. As I mentioned to you before, I can't always see what's going on question-wise until afterwards. So I can only see 4 comments at a time. I see that Joy has been answered. It is 18 gauge and I started with around 13 to 14 inches to begin this process. So I've created a little basket shape down at the bottom and we're just wrapping around that core. Now it really does take only a few extra moments just to tidy up all of those coils, but once your beads are in position you won't have the opportunity to do this. So just take those extra few seconds now, and in that way when you have finalised your jewellery pieces you'll be delighted with the attention to detail. So we've got this funny little sort of basket shape down at the bottom. You can play around with the angles. Now I'm going to show you a cheat. If you get this far and you think, actually I wanted this to be much more like a half circle and I've totally overcooked it, because we warmed that wire, give that a warm, I'm just going to alter slightly where the shape fits in this section of wire. So this is an easy fix for you. I'm going to just flatten that down slightly and move that angle along, re-straighten the side, do the exact same thing on the other side. So at the moment that's all wonky and lopsided. I'm going to flip that over and repeat what I just did, which was to slowly, gradually eat along the wire slightly, move where you want that angle to be. Obviously the ideal would be to have this perfect, but I just want to show you how to fix things as you go. So I think it needs to move just a tiny, tiny bit more. And that is the joy of warming your wire before you get stuck into a design. Now that for me is a little bit more fan shape and a little bit less basket-like, because we've got a D shape here. Can you imagine? That's a pretty good D shape or a half circle. I actually had a little bit too much wire, but we fixed that and we fixed it very, very quickly. And I'm not overly worried about any tool marking. So we have our first section of the tutorial done and dusted. So I'm just going to smooth through the long tail of wire like so. Just 2 or 3 times to make sure that that's nice and fluid before I think about adding on the beads. Now we have choices here. Shall I remake with the other half of Merlot, or shall I make a completely different design with the moonlit lilies? What do you think? Moonlit lilies or remake the same design with Merlot? What shall we do? I need to hang around on the comments for a second, just so that I can see the answers. I'm just going to give that a bit of a warm. We've got moonlit lilies to work with. So we've got a very large Tensha bead for the centerpiece, and another little bead there with some gorgeous bits and bobs to go with. Or I can recreate the exact same design as I did for this section, for the demonstration piece, in the Merlot strand. What do you fancy? I've got Robin saying moonlit. Let's get 3 or 4 votes in and see. Moonlit lilies for Sue. Moonlight lily. I know what you meant. Moonlit lilies it is. Fair enough. Let's get this little heart-shaped box out of the way. Was that a reference to a band from the 90s? It might have been. Who knows? Who knows? You never know with Gem. So we're going to add on our beads. The white one, which is the moonlit. Lots of requests for moonlit. The decision has been made. We are working with the lilies right now. So you will be able to adapt the design whichever of the beautiful Tensha beads you get. You will be able to work up something in this nature. I'm just going to randomly grab some of these. What I will do is start down at the base with one of these exquisite. Let me just hop back. I need to go back to my streaming software now, my loves, so that I can see that everything is in focus. Okay, so let's get those beads over to the side. Okay, so I'm going to start with a bead cap. And yes, I've dropped something. At least it's not on the floor. So I think the bead cap, and I think probably we'll go for the largest of the Moonlit Lilies. Allow that to slide down. Absolutely gorgeous. And I think then we'll have a spacer in. Which spacer? I think maybe one of the rhinestone spacers, one of the rondelles, like so. Gives a real nice airy appeal, and you can really appreciate each of those beads. Then we might have one of these milky crystal rondelles, like so. Let's have another spacer, shall we? Let's go for a daisy spacer this time. Hopefully they're visible zip lining down, whee, into position. Let's have another of the smaller Tensha beads. I love these so much. They are absolutely gorgeous. I love the metallic nature of the transfers as well. Gorgeous, gorgeous, gorgeous. So I think now we're going to have the other daisy spacer. Allow that to slide down, and like I said, whichever of the Tensha shorty strands you get, this design is going to work. So let's go for the other milky rondelle. I have genuinely no clue what any of the names of these individual components are, so you'll just have to work it out from what I'm saying. And then let's finish off with the second of the smaller, beautiful Tensha beads. Oh no! Guess what I forgot? I forgot a spacer. Let's go for that other rhinestone rondelle then. So rhinestone cowboy. Nobody ever accused me of being able to sing, so sorry about that. Now we could finish off with a bead cap that hangs over the top. I think it would look a little bit like a lantern. I think that would be quite pretty. If you think that's too much, you don't have to have that on there. Maybe that will overshadow the Tensha bead a little bit. But I kind of like it. I'm going to go for that anyway. And from this strand, you've still got 2 daisy spacers, 2 rhinestone encrusted ball spacers or beads, and then you've got these 2 frankly huge milky opalescent coloured glass crystal beads as well. So let's just get the remainder of those beads out of the way and off the board. I mean, I would probably wear them as earrings anyway, but, you know, that's just me. So I'm going to do now a wrapped loop up at the top. Let's just check back and see if there are questions. That would make a beautiful pendant. It absolutely would. It's definitely lilies all the way, my darlings. Thank you, Nana. Thank you, Joy Joy. Absolutely fabulous to have your company. Thank you for hanging out with me. So what I'm going to do now is finish off up top with a wrapped loop. Now for earrings, I tend to use really very small wrapped loops, and for pendants I go for large wrapped loops because it leaves your options open with regard to stranding materials. You can get quite a chunky chain, quite a chunky clasp through one of these, whereas if you make it too teeny it might not work for you later on. So I'm just going to do that wrapped loop now. So when you're making a pendant design, you will need to have the wrapped loop coming up and forwards so that, let me just grab a second piece of wire, so that when you put your threading material through, it sits like so. I've seen lots of people making pendants with the wrapped loop like this, and then it never quite sits. It never quite, oh Lord, I can't word. It never quite sits correctly because the wrapped loop is always fighting with how the pendant wants to sit. So make sure that your wrapped loops are always at 90 degrees to the face of the pendant. So let's just pop that one over to one side. There is indeed another one of those naughty cactus flies on my board. So sorry about Fred. Fred should just buzz off. So the wire up at the top is going to come forwards and away from the board now. So if I turn that through 90 degrees, this is how it will sit against the body. 90 degrees to that is where the line comes forwards. Now if you have bail making pliers, absolutely fantastic. If you don't, you can use whichever round form you like. I'm just going to grab my 6-step bail makers. I'm releasing a tutorial on YouTube tomorrow to make a very strong infinity chain using the 2-step bail makers, which are an absolute boon to wire working. So I'm just going to put a little bit of warmth through the next section of wire, like so. And then I'm going to pick a size, and I think I'm going to go for step 6, which is the largest. And I'm just going to rotate that wire around so that we get the shepherd's hook effect, like so. I've got quite a long tail of wire at the moment, so it's naturally caught on absolutely everything. And let's draw that tail of wire swoopily around and underneath. Now it's gone slightly sideways because obviously there's a desk underneath and that gets in the way. Now for my regular pendants, I very frequently create a design with a swirl on the front or a coil to cover up the mechanics. With this design, I felt that very, very clean lines were order of the day. So hence down at the base, you've got these coils. They've been repeated here. And up at the top, you've just got neat and tidy coils. So the key here is to take the wire so that it finishes at the back. So I'm looping the long tail of wire around the core that's up at the top of that bead. I'm just going to give that a tiny, tiny squeeze to get that to sit as straight and as true as possible. Supporting, and again, this is some really useful time to have one of these very, very flat pliers. I'm just going to take that tail around as many times as I can fit in the space. Now we've protected our Tensha beads with a lovely layer of acrylic over the top of the transfer, but having those bead caps will again protect them from the end of the wire. So it's very useful to put a bead cap either up at the top or a spacer bead, something like that. And what we're looking to do is to finish the coil of wire on the back of the design. So the wire on the lower end, it's actually quite imperceptible where that finishes. I think probably that's the front, that's the neatest side. So I would try to repeat that on the upper side as well. I'm just going to tighten that coil of wire up by pressing gently until it elevates to where I want it to sit. I'm going to support that loop. I've slightly mangled that loop, but I'm not going to cry over it today. Take the wire as far round the back as possible of your design. Trim that away again, look twice. If you fail to cut the first time, it's better than cutting the wrong bit. So I'm just going to straighten everything up slightly and then chase that tail of wire around the back of the coil that we made before getting that as straight as I possibly can. Now it's not ideal, I have ever so slightly mangled it, but again, it's when you have a camera a couple of inches above your hands. Normally I would be bringing this up to my face to inspect it as I go. It's all fairly rescuable. I can pop that onto a round form and get that a little bit smoother a little bit later on. So I'm not overly upset or obsessing about it. So that's the basic of our fan drop pendant. I'm just going to drop that down here for a second, side by side, clear the board slightly of some tools, and I'm going to check in for the last 4 comments. The loop can easily be moved if necessary, though. This is very, very true. That would make a beautiful pendant. Lovely. Okay, so we're working with Merlot on the demonstration piece in silver colour, 18 gauge round wire. And on the live tutorial today, I'm working again with copper because it does show up just a little bit more nicely when I'm working in the lighting conditions available. It's a nice day here in the UK, so that makes a change. Another reason to get flat facing pliers is that you can give everything a nice mighty squish. If you prefer, you can pop this onto a block, which has gone AWOL. I did have a block here the other day, I don't know where it is now. Pop it onto a block and just hammer very, very gently once you're sure that you're happy with that overall bowl or little basket shape down at the bottom. So the next thing that we're going to do, I have an excess of wire which I cut off the end, and that's a perfectly adequate amount to make the inner section of our fan drop design. What I will say is this has seen some action, so it's a little bit tight. Sometimes you could save this piece of wire by turning it into coils and making it useful. Coils make absolutely fantastic charms, especially when you build them up. So if you didn't want to use that, if that's a little bit hardened, then you only need really a very short amount of wire. I did get a piece ready just in case. Overall, your project will need around about 13 to 14 inches if you're looking to use the majority of a shorty strand. But you can play that by ear. So if you wanted to add fresh wire, you absolutely can. So I'm just going to grip hold of the end and give that a little smooth and warm through. And then in a moment I need to grab in my 26 gauge wire. Again, I'm going to be using the raw copper just because it shows up a little bit more nicely. Now, do you remember we left a mark earlier on the wooden mandrel? Because what we want to do is recreate part of that arc. So I've just laid the centre of that short section of wire, and it's only about 4 inches, just over the top in the same place. And you might need to tighten it up slightly. It needs to be just ever so slightly smaller. So what I'm doing is I'm just very gently bouncing those ends together. It needs to fit inside. So I've over bounced that one. That's fine. we can open that out again until that sits neatly inside the little bowl down at the bottom of our fan design. So that's pretty close. I'm quite happy with how that's looking if I get the light to shine on it. And what I need to do now is put some nice angles on it. So if I just hold this in the correct orientation, I've now got all of my pliers over on the right hand side and I couldn't see the one I wanted. So just play with that until it fits exactly how you want it to fit. I just want it to sit in the centre, so if you need to put it back on the mandrel, you absolutely can. I'm fairly confident I can just manually adapt that until it sits how I want it to. Yeah, that looks pretty decent. So I'm going to go up to one side, and do you remember we had about half a circle earlier? We're going down to about a quarter. Is it a quadrant when it's a quarter of a circle? I can't remember. As I mentioned earlier, maths and myself do not mix overly well. So I'm going to do the same on the other side, like so, and just cross those wires over for a moment until I get some really sharp angles into play. So you may need to just reopen that if you need to. Once you're happy again with the angle, the shapes that you're creating, you could, if you wanted to, hammer just this section, just around that arcing shape, but don't go too mad up on these sides because they will need to move in just a moment. So what I'm going to do, I'm happy with that shape. I'm going to open and close my flat facing pliers, my bent chain nose pliers in this instance. Open and close those a couple of times, and I'm actually pressing so hard at this stage that I'm changing the shape of wire from round to an almost oval shape. And you can achieve something very similar with a hammer. You can make it almost square if you smack it hard enough. So I'm happy with the shape. Let's just hold that up for size. Yep, that's not too bad at all. What I need to do now is work on these side angles. Now they need to be straight for the design to work. So it doesn't matter really if you bend them out of shape whilst you're getting the arc right. We just want that to be nice and super straight, and you can strengthen it by kind of opening and closing it a bit as you go. So let's just pop that back into position. That's starting to look reasonably decent. What we're looking for is to not have that crossover. We want those to almost meet and touch, as they do here. Again, this is why I use copper, because it just shows up better. I'm just going to hop onto the comments to see if there's anything on the live that I need to address now. That's brilliant. So, lately, when I've been working with wire, I hear Gem's voice say, "Warm the wire," in my head. I am happy to be living in your head, my love. Very, very happy indeed. Thank you so much for watching. And remembering to warm the wire really is number one on your wire working schedule of things to remember. So I'm just going to make sure that I'm happy with all of those before I start to open out the angles on either side. I'm just going to flip it over. If I move that over slightly, it might help visually. Flip that out ever so slightly. And we're looking for these, as I said earlier, they don't want to cross over, they just want to meet. So that looks pretty decent. Where they're crossing over now is where I'm going to turn them back just beneath that. And if I move things out of the way, I'll show you what I mean. So we have a right-hand wire that goes all the way across to the left-hand side. So I'm going to pinch that from underneath. We just hold the pliers in a very weird fashion. And you can see I'm holding them before it meets that crossover point. I'm going to push the right-hand wire back to the right. And I want it to sit parallel to that left-hand wire for a hot minute. Doesn't have to stay there for long. Let's just open that out slightly. The key with this design is to make it fit. If it doesn't fit, make it fit. So that looks pretty decent to me. I just need to reflect that on the opposite side. So one of the things when you're working with wire is expectation versus reality. If I hold this in the proper orientation, where you put the pliers, you can see what we want to do. Our left-hand wire comes up to the pliers. We want it to come back on itself, back to the left, so that they no longer cross over. If you take the tip of your pliers to exactly where the bend occurs on the right-hand side, what will happen is the left-hand side will be higher. And that's because the wire has to bend around back on itself. So what we need to do is make a small allowance for that to occur. So we take those pliers down. It's very weird holding it like this for me now, but you can see how much lower it is on the left visually it looks like it's not going to sit in the correct place. But if I start bending that wire back around, that's pretty much where I wanted it to be. And if you do go slightly too low or slightly too high, you can, again, because we warmed the wire and we haven't smacked this too hard yet, just adjust that slightly. So I'm going to lay that over the base of the fan design using the beautiful Moonlit Lilies. I'm actually really happy with how this is coming out. So you can see that they bend back in the direction from whence they came. And they're going to now caress the wire up at the top. So the right hand wire is going to sit over on the right hand angled section, and ditto for the left. So what we need to do is get some bends in these angled wires coming out at the side, and the wire here is going to go along a little way and then go down 90 degrees towards the table. So if I pop that on the design and pinch it firmly into position, let's just get that lined up slightly. It needs to be centralised. Like I said earlier, you can play around with these angles. If they're not 100% right, you can mess with them until they are. So what you've got is the inner frame is sitting currently over the top of that outer frame. Where that right hand wire goes over the top here, I want to bring this tail downwards. We only need a very small amount behind that, so I'm going to remove the design from view for a second. I'm going to pinch the wire just past the angle and push that down. Now, because we warmed the wire and we haven't whacked this bit yet, there is enough fluidity in it. If it goes a little bit awry, so that's still a little bit too far upwards, I can take some of that away. So for now, what I'm going to do is drop the main section out of the way. You can see the right angle bend here. I'm just going to move it ever so slightly further along the wire, like so. Now, if you struggle with this design, you can bring in a second pair of pliers. I'm just going to grab my wide pliers, and I'm going to support where I think the bend should take place in a pair of flat facing pliers and draw that wire down sharply. And again, it's at around about 90 degrees. So I think probably I've taken that a little bit too short this time. So I'll just get those side by side, pop it onto the frame, making sure that you're looking at the front, and sit that into position. Actually, that's pretty decent. I'm quite happy with that. So we're going to, again, remove the drop pendant out of the way, and let's just get rid of some of this wire at the back. We don't need it. It's getting in the way. So I'm trimming that to a very small amount. In terms of parts of an inch, it's maybe 1/8 of an inch, something like that. We tend to switch to millimetres in the UK when it gets down to this kind of size. So it's around about 5 or 6 millimetres. So I'm going to pop that back over the top of the design. Sit the baskety section, that arc, inside the larger arc. And what I do need to do before I do the last section that connects these two is make sure that the angles I've created on the right and the left match each other, because if I don't, it will bug me later. So you can take a second to just make sure that those are as symmetrical as you need them to be. That's a little bit more symmetrical. You can just straighten that up a tiny bit if you wish to. And then for the last time, we're going to pop that over the top, sit that into position, make sure that you're happy with the centralisation of the inner section to the outer section, and all we're going to do to connect them is to fold these pieces over the back. So I'm going to push down onto that frame and just draw that little tail over the back and get it to hide behind where it came from. So push, tiny, tiny movements, tiny movements, tiny movements. Turn that sideways, you can see it's just a hook. It's literally just a hook. It's hooking on. So if I flip the design over, you'll see that in a second we're going to do the exact same thing on the far side. If you can see any little bits of wire sticking through, you may wish to trim that. I'm just going to get this second side pushed in. So again, it's a very tiny residue of wire on the back, and I'm going to use very small movements. Wire work is 50% warming the wire, 50% patience while you do things a lot slower than perhaps you'd like to do. So the last part of the tutorial, once you're happy with how this is sitting, and again you can mess around slightly with these angles if you wanted to, just bring that up slightly or straighten a bit. You will have much more time at your leisure to decide how you want that to sit. For instance, I would quite like that to be a little bit narrower into the middle. So I would just mess around with that until it sits exactly how I want it to. I'd also take a tiny bit of wire off the back. So I'll show you what I mean. I'm just going to trim the tiniest end away, making sure that you're looking. I don't know where that went. That one's safe. That one's in the scrap pot. The other one probably on Mars by now. Not quite sure. It flew some. So again, making sure that these two are the correct size before you get going. I'm just going to close up those two little hooks to bring them neatly together. And then I'll show you how to start the weave down at the bottom. Let me just check in to see if there are any questions that I can help you with right now. I'm just going to hold that in possession while I do. Bug you later, I know what you mean. I have pulled things apart and redone because something bugged me later. 100%. Yeah, fix it now. It's much easier to fix it now. I like the wire working, but it never comes out right. So can you tell me what the best way to learn wiring? Warm the wire. Always warm the wire. And just keep trying, my darling. Wire in itself isn't awfully expensive if you're working with a copper or a coated copper. Alina says, hi, beautiful souls. Jem makes me want to expand my work with wire. Thank you. This is a very useful class. I really appreciate that, my darling. Anne says, you're in my head when I work with wire too. It reminds me that I need to warm the wire before forming the wire. Warm before form. Warm before form. Oh, hold on a minute. Anne, I think you've hit a thing. Warm before you form. Warm the wire before you form the wire. I really like that. Cheers. So what we're going to do now is just wire this section together down at the bottom. Now, what you will have done with your design is you will have made sure that those circles are of a similar size. I'm just going to stretch it to fit. I'm not overly concerned. Like I said before, you will have a lot more time to make sure things are utterly perfect. You can even drop this side of the assembly onto a block and just, if you have the block underneath, gently hammer once you're 100% certain that you're happy with the shape. Now, I'm not going to show you the whole weave because it would be a little bit boring for you, but you will need probably only about 7 or 8 inches of wire. I tend to, where possible, work off the reel. And in that way, if I underestimate how much wire I need, it's not awful. I don't have to add on. For this weave, I'm just going to allow the central section to fall away. And I'm going to start in the middle by wrapping 3 times around the central bottom of the outer of those frame sections. So it's a roundabout in the middle. It doesn't really matter if it's not perfect. And I'm going to wrap 3 times very firmly every time I'm bringing the wire around. So all I'm doing is circling around. It's like a helix. Get 3 little wraps together. Scooch those up really neatly and as firmly as possible. Centralise your inner fan section. And then we're going to take the tail on the one side. So my finer gauge wire is currently coming over the top of that outer frame. I'm bringing it all the way around. I've done 3 little wraps on the outer frame. So I'm going to take the tail of the wire now inside the whole assembly. If the cactus fly is annoying, I'm very sorry. Frank, do you mind? And then the tail has come up through the centre, across the top of both the inner and the outer. Shoo! Really? You're such an attention seeker. Sorry about that. The tail of wire has come up through the centre. It's crossing over the top of the inner and the outer frames. And then what I'm going to do is bring the tail around just that outer frame again. Now it looks a bit crazy at the moment, but when you bring that around and you push that into the gap, you can see what's going to happen. I'm going to now circle 3 times around just that outer frame. And you can push that every time you create a circle. Push that into position if you prefer, if you value your nails. Not for long if you're going to work with wire. Some people get acrylic tips so that they can work with wire successfully. So I've done another 3 wraps around that outer frame. So the tail now needs to come up inside that inner frame as well. Pull that all the way through nice and tight, making sure the wires aren't crossing over at the back. A singular wrap around both the inner and the outer before returning to 3 wraps around that outer frame. Now you can use any weaving that you fancy. You could do 5 and 2, you could do 1 and 4, whatever makes you happy. With wire weaving like this is very simple entry to wire weaving. It's repetition that makes it beautiful. So you can even go for 5 wraps in the middle, 1 wrap around at either end of both of them, and then reduce to 4 wraps around the outer, 1 wrap around both, 3 wraps around the outer, 1 wrap around both, and reduce. And that's a really nice aspect to work with as well. So the weaving, as long as you have a pattern in your head, doesn't really matter what you do. So I'm taking the tail up inside, bringing the end all the way around. So what you will see at the end of the day is a 3 and 1 wrap. 3 around the outer, 1 around both. When you get to the end, I'm just going to scooch this all the way up. So we're imagining that we've filled the whole section of that inner fan. I'm going to pinch that very, very firmly. Finish off with 1 wrap around both the inner and the outer. And then pull that super tight and go for 3 wraps around the outer. Now when you finish a weave, when you finish any weave, you need, wherever you possibly can, to finish wrapping around a singular frame wire. I'll take you to the back of the design now. Let me just give that a nice tighten up. Take you to the back of the design. I'm going to bring that tail over, and where the wire has just gone past the outside of the back of that frame, I'm just going to trim that away neatly, and then use the tip of my pliers to get that to sit down as close as possible to inside and away from everything else. Once you've finished that off, you can give that a nice squish and a squeeze to make it neat and tidy. Now the reason you finish off wrapping around a single piece of wire is that you can find a place for that end to fit. If you cut the tail of your wire, imagine this is the finer gauge wire, if you cut it over 2, it's a lot of loose wire to get caught on things. If you cut the tail at the back of a single piece of wire, you can almost squish it so that it sits away and it won't get caught on anything. I always do a shake test and a rub test with wire working. A shake test when I'm setting cabochons to make sure that they don't go flying out. I think I have one here I can show you. It's not attached to too much. So this is my South Seas pendant that I made a few weeks ago on YouTube. When I finish designing something like this is the shake test. Turn it over. This is the shake test. So I know that the cab is never going to come loose. With wire wrapping jewellery, I always do a little rub when everything's finished. And if my finger can either catch on something or sense a jagged end, that's going to become a problem in wear. So always seek and destroy your ragged ends. Yes, that might have been a Metallica reference. Who knows? So I'm just going to give that a nice little tidy squish and a squeeze. And you would obviously make sure that your inner fan is centralised to your outer fan. You would concentrate a lot harder than I did on your dimensions. You could measure these to make sure that they're all okay. Just going to give that a bit of a squish and a squeeze. Once it's all tidied up, it should look something like this, but in copper. So this is your Merlot. This is your Moonlit Lilies. And this one is your Midnight Cherry Blossom, or Sakura. Beautiful that they are. Now, I mentioned to you earlier on about my Make With Me class, which I'm currently sporting. That's next week on the 2nd of April. There were, before I went to air, 3 kits still available. If you're in the US, shipping is still possible. Going forwards and into May, I'm just looking at my dates because I can't keep a thing in my head. 4th to the 7th of May, we at Jessie James are running our Beads and Blooms Springtime Festival of Making Jewellery. Have a look. There are 10 classes and it's a real bumper pack of goodies that you would get for that one. Those are being subscribed quite quickly, so have a look at that, see what you think. I'm going to drop you down one more time to look at those gorgeous Tensha beads because I am in love with them. So this strand was Merlot, that's a half strand. There are still some beads left after making the Fan Drop Pendant. This strand was the Moonlit Lilies, which I think is an exquisite name. That one has the 3 beautiful Tensha beads, but also loads of auxiliary beads to go with. And this last one is the Midnight Cherry Blossom. Now I will check back through the comments on the Facebook live feed and see if there are any questions that I have missed. Unfortunately, it has been decreed today I can only see 4 comments at a time. Oh well, never mind. I am back next week, Saturday the 2nd of April, with my Soul of the Ocean, Make With Me. I keep wanting to call it Heart of the Ocean. Shh, Don't tell anyone. Don't tell Sarah. I don't think I called it the wrong name today. Maybe I did. Who knows? I look forward to seeing you again very, very soon. If you're joining us at Beads and Blooms, happy spring creativity. If you're joining me next week, you can watch anyway, but get yourself a kit. It's beautiful. Really, really lovely. And it's a fob style spinner. So if you are the type of person that needs to play with your jewellery, I know I quite frequently do, then that might be one for you. I look forward to seeing you again no matter where it is. I'm over on YouTube. I upload on Sundays. I'm here on Jessie James on Saturdays. I'm buzzing around usually Facebook on a Monday. So if you have any questions, just reach out. I look forward to seeing you very, very soon. Bye for now, my darlings.